The boardroom erupted in chaos, voices colliding like market crashes, but Dominic Blackwood didn't flinch. He stood at the head of the mahogany table, hands flat against polished wood, watching 11 men realize they'd miscalculated. The hostile takeover they'd orchestrated, $2 billion leveraged against Blackwood Capital's crown jewel properties, crumbled in real time as his phone buzzed once on the table. Just once. That was all it took. "Gentlemen," he said, voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "I don't negotiate. I acquire or I destroy." The phone screen glowed with a single message: Singapore deal closed. "They're out." Dominic pushed it across the table toward Gerald Whitmore, the lead vulture who'd assembled this pathetic coup attempt. The old man's face drained of color as he read. The Singapore Consortium, their entire financial backbone, had just signed with Blackwood instead. Dominic had outbid them by 3% and closed the deal while these fools argued over percentage points. "Meeting adjourned," Dominic said, already turning toward the door. Raymond Pierce, his attorney and closest thing to a friend, fell into step beside him as they exited into the corridor. The younger man's expression held a mix of admiration and concern that Dominic had learned to ignore. "That was surgical," Raymond said quietly. "They'll never try that again." They shouldn't have tried it once. The elevator descended 47 floors in silence. Dominic's reflection stared back from polished steel, 58 years old. Silver threading through dark hair, he refused to dye lines around his eyes that came from squinting at spreadsheets more than smiling. His suit cost $8,000. His watch could buy a house in most American cities. Everything about him screamed success, power, control. Everything except the hollow feeling that expanded in his chest the moment he stepped into his empty office. The corner suite overlooked downtown Chicago, glass walls offering a kingdom he'd built from borrowed capital and relentless ambition. 28 years ago, he'd stood in a studio apartment with $10,000 and a dream that everyone called foolish. His first wife had believed in him then, before the money came, before she realized that building empires meant sacrificing everything else. The framed photograph on his desk sat face down. It had been that way for 3 years, since Victoria, his daughter, his only child, had walked out of a Christmas dinner and never looked back. She blamed him for the divorce, for her mother's bitterness for choosing conference calls over ballet recitals. She wasn't entirely wrong. Dominic's phone buzzed. Dr. Morrison, his physician. He declined the call. The depression medication wasn't working because pills couldn't cure the fundamental problem. He'd achieved everything he'd wanted and discovered it meant nothing. His computer screen showed the Singapore contract already generating revenue projections that would make shareholders ecstatic. Numbers that should have thrilled him. Instead, he felt only the familiar numbness, the sense of going through motions in a play where he'd forgotten why he'd auditioned. The Grand Meridian Hotel occupied 12 city blocks, a monument to excess and old money. Dominic had lived in the penthouse suite for 6 months, ever since the divorce from wife number 2 became final. The suite cost more per night than most people earned in a month, but it felt less like a home than the studio apartment had decades ago. The lobby gleamed with marble and crystal, guests moving through spaces designed to make them feel both insignificant and privileged. Dominic walked past the concierge desk without acknowledgement. These people knew his face, his preferences, his schedule. They knew everything except who he actually was. The elevator required a key card for penthouse access. As the doors slid open on the 48th floor, Dominic's phone rang again. This time he answered. "I told you I'm fine, Morrison." "You're not fine." The doctor's voice carried professional concern wrapped in bluntness. "The medication only works if you engage with the therapy. Dominic pills won't cure loneliness." "I'm not lonely. I'm busy." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." A pause. "When's the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about money?" Dominic ended the call without answering because he couldn't remember. The penthouse spread across 3,000 square feet of emptiness. Furniture that cost more than cars. Art that belonged in museums, floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing a city that never stopped moving. He stood at the glass watching lights flicker on as dusk settled and felt absolutely nothing. His stomach growled he'd skipped lunch again. The hotel restaurant could send something up, but the thought of eating alone in this cathedral of wealth made his throat tight. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and headed back to the elevator, seeking distraction and motion. The hotel's service corridors were a different world from the gleaming public spaces. Dominic had taken a wrong turn coming back from the gym 3 days ago and stumbled into this maze of narrow hallways and industrial lighting. He'd been fascinated by the contrast, the invisible machinery that kept luxury running smoothly. He turned a corner and nearly collided with her. She was young, mid-20s, maybe wearing a housekeeping uniform 2 sizes too large. Her skin had the pallor of someone who worked too much and slept too little, dark circles under eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to close. She stumbled, and he reached out instinctively to steady her. "When did you last eat?" The question escaped before he could stop it. She pulled away from his grip, face flushing with embarrassment or anger or both. "I'm fine, sir." But she wasn't fine. He could see it in the way she gripped the supply cart for balance, the tremor in her hands, the badge pinned to her chest that read E. Hartley, 2 years service, 2 years of cleaning up after people like him, invisible labor that kept his world spinning. "You're about to pass out," he said. "I said I'm fine." Sharper, now defensive. She straightened, meeting his eyes with a flash of pride that surprised him. "I apologize for the disruption, Mr. Blackwood. I'll be more careful." She knew his name. Of course she did, the penthouse resident, the man whose tips probably represented her weekly grocery budget. The realization made him feel exposed in a way board meetings never did. "Wait," he said as she started to push the cart away. "Have you worked through your meal break?" "That's not your concern, sir." Something in her voice, the careful professionalism layered over desperation, made him reach for his wallet. He pulled out $500 bills and held them out. She stared at the money like it might bite her. "I don't need charity." "Then consider it a tip for excellent service." "I haven't provided you any service." Her jaw set in a way that told him she'd rather starve than accept pity. "Please put that away." Dominic found himself fascinated by her refusal. Most people in his world would have taken the money with a smile and a story about how they deserved it. This woman looked at $500 like it was an insult. "What's your name?" "Evangeline Hartley." She said it like a challenge. "And I'm late for my next room." She pushed past him, the cart rattling down the corridor, leaving him standing there with money in his hand and a strange feeling in his chest that might have been respect. Back in the penthouse, Dominic couldn't shake the encounter. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey, a ritual from his startup days when celebratory drinks marked survival rather than victory, and pulled out his phone. "Raymond," he said when his attorney answered, "I need you to look into someone." A pause. "Who?" "Evangeline Hartley. She works housekeeping at the Meridian. I want to know everything." "Sir?" Raymond's discomfort traveled clearly through the line. "This is unusual." "Just do it." "You're asking me to investigate a hotel employee." I pay you extremely well to handle unusual requests without judgment. Can you do this or not?" Raymond sighed. "I'll have something by morning." Dominic ended the call and immediately felt the weight of what he'd done. This was wrong, an invasion of privacy, an abuse of power, exactly the kind of thing that made Victoria refuse to speak to him. But something about Evangeline Hartley's exhausted pride had lodged under his skin like a splinter, and he needed to understand why. The whiskey burned going down. He stood at the windows watching the city pulse with life he couldn't touch, and wondered when he'd become the kind of man who bought information instead of earning trust. Sleep didn't come easily. He lay in a bed large enough for 4 people, staring at shadows on the ceiling, thinking about a woman who'd rather starve than accept help. Somewhere in this building she was probably still working, pushing that cart through endless corridors, cleaning up messes made by people who'd never see her face. When had he stopped seeing people? When had everyone become transactions problems to solve with money and power? The questions chased themselves through his mind until exhaustion finally pulled him under. Morning came with Raymond's email, a comprehensive dossier that made Dominic feel like a stalker and a bastard. But he read it anyway, unable to stop himself. Evangeline Marie Hartley, age 24, born in Evanston, Illinois. Parents David and Catherine Hartley deceased 3 years ago in automobile accident on I-90. Evangeline was a junior at Harvard, double major in comparative literature and philosophy, 3.9 GPA. Left school following parents' death to care for younger sister Lillian Hartley, age 16. Current employment: Chicago Memorial Hospital, Emergency Department, nurse part-time, 20 hours per week. Grand Meridian Hotel housekeeping full-time, 50 hours per week. Total annual income approximately $47,000. Outstanding debts, $127,000 in medical bills for sister's ongoing treatment. Sister's diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia stage 4. Dominic read the report 3 times each pass, making him feel worse. This woman, barely older than a girl, carried more weight than most of his executives handled in their entire careers. She'd sacrificed Harvard, sacrificed her future, watching her sister die by inches, while working herself into the ground to pay for treatments that probably weren't enough. And he'd offered her $500 like it could solve anything. His phone showed 7 missed calls from Victoria. He stared at her name on the screen, wondering if this was finally the breakthrough he'd prayed for, then listened to the voicemail. "Dad?" Her voice was cold, formal. Everything he'd taught her about professional distance turned into a weapon. "I'm calling because the board asked me to. There's concern about your recent behavior. The Singapore deal was reckless. You overpaid by $17 million just to prove a point. That's not leadership, that's ego. They want me to talk to you about stepping back, about letting younger leadership take over." A pause, and for just a moment he heard the daughter beneath the executive armor. "I told them I'd try, but we both know you don't listen to anyone, especially not me." The voicemail ended. Dominic set the phone down carefully, afraid of what he might do if he held it any longer. Victoria was on the board now, had been for 2 years, a position she'd earned through merit despite his name. She was brilliant, ruthless, everything he'd hoped she'd become, and she hated him for it. The whiskey bottle sat on the counter, tempting and useless. Instead, he showered, dressed in a suit that cost more than Evangeline's monthly salary, and headed to the office. Work was the only thing he knew how to do anymore. But first he made a call. "Mr. Hartley," he said when a man answered at Chicago Memorial. "This is Dominic Blackwood. I understand your facility is treating a patient named Lillian Hartley." "I'm not at liberty to discuss patient information, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking about experimental treatment options, the kind that might save a 16-year-old girl's life if money wasn't an obstacle." Silence. Then, "There's a clinical trial at Northwestern. Targeted immunotherapy. Success rate is around 70% for patients her age, but it's expensive. Insurance won't cover it." "How expensive?" $150,000 for the initial course. If it works, another $50,000 for maintenance therapy." Dominic thanked him and ended the call. $200,000. A rounding error in his quarterly budget. An impossible mountain for a 24-year-old working 3 jobs to keep her sister breathing. The thought that formed in his mind was insane, reckless, exactly the kind of impulsive decision that made Victoria question his fitness to lead. He should let it go, maybe make an anonymous donation to Lillian's treatment fund, return to the comfortable numbness of business as usual. Instead, he called Raymond again. "I need a contract drawn up. Personal services agreement." "What kind of services?" "Companionship. 1 week of someone's time, no sexual services required, complete confidentiality. Payment of $150,000, half up front, half upon completion." Raymond's silence stretched long enough that Dominic checked if the call had dropped. Finally, "Sir, you're describing—" "I know what it sounds like. That's why I need it structured as an employment contract with explicit terms stating no sexual contact required. Can you do it or not?" "I can do it." Raymond's voice carried resignation and concern in equal measure. "But I think you should reconsider. This isn't you." "Maybe that's the problem." Dominic stared at the skyline, feeling something close to purpose for the first time in months. "Have it ready by end of day." He spent the afternoon pretending to work while his mind spun scenarios. This was crazy, offering a desperate woman money for her time, leveraging her sister's illness to get what he wanted. Except, what did he want? Not sex. Not really. He wanted what he'd seen in Evangeline's exhausted pride authenticity. Someone who saw him as a man instead of an ATM. Someone who couldn't be bought even when she desperately needed money. The contradiction didn't escape him. He was trying to buy her precisely because she couldn't be bought. The irony was thick enough to choke on. At 6 p.m., Raymond delivered the contract personally. He sat across from Dominic's desk, expression carefully neutral. "This is wrong," Raymond said quietly. "You know that, right? I'm offering help to someone who needs it. You're leveraging a dying child to get companionship from a woman young enough to be your daughter. That's not help, Dominic. That's exploitation." The words hit harder because Raymond almost never used his first name. Dominic looked at the contract, at the carefully worded clauses designed to make this seem legitimate, and felt shame burn through his chest. "What if I mean it?" he asked. "What if I genuinely just want someone to talk to, someone who isn't after my money?" "Then you're an idiot." Raymond stood, straightening his tie. "Because the moment you offer her money, that's exactly what you become. Just another rich man who thinks everything's for sale." He left before Dominic could respond. The contract sat on the desk, pages filled with legal language that couldn't hide what this really was, a transaction disguised as charity loneliness, dressed up as generosity. Dominic should have torn it up, should have made an anonymous donation and forgotten about Evangeline Hartley, should have accepted that some things couldn't be fixed with money and power. Instead, he folded the contract into his jacket pocket and headed back to the hotel. The service corridors were busier in the evening, staff moving between floors with efficiency born from repetition. Dominic felt conspicuous in his suit, drawing stares from workers who recognized him but didn't understand why he was there. He found Evangeline on the 32nd floor replacing towels in a bathroom that already looked spotless. She saw him in the mirror and froze, and in that moment he saw fear flash across her face before professionalism smoothed it away. "Mr. Blackwood." She turned hands, gripping a stack of towels like armor. "Is there something wrong with your suite?" "No. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was inappropriate." Her eyebrows rose slightly. Apparently rich men didn't apologize to housekeepers often. "It's forgotten, sir." "Good." He pulled the envelope from his pocket, the one Raymond had prepared with $500 in cash. "I also wanted to give you this properly, not as charity, as an apology for my rudeness." She didn't take it. "I told you I don't need—" "It's not about need." He set the envelope on the counter between them. "It's about me being an ass and wanting to make it right." Something shifted in her expression. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of thaw. She looked at the envelope, then back at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care?" "Because you looked at $500 like it was an insult instead of salvation. Because you chose pride over survival. Because I haven't met anyone real in so long I'd forgotten what it looked like." "I don't know," he said instead. "Maybe I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only see my wallet." She studied him with eyes that had learned to measure people quickly, searching for danger or deception. Whatever she found made her take a small step back. "I need to finish this floor," she said quietly. "Thank you for the apology, but I can't accept the money." "Then let me hire you." The words came out before he'd fully formed the thought, but once spoken he committed to them. "1 week of your time. I'll pay you $150,000 to be my companion. No sexual services required. Just be there. Talk to me. Help me remember what it's like to have a conversation that isn't about profit margins." The silence that followed felt infinite. Evangeline stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. Then her face hardened. "You're serious?" "Completely." "You want to pay me $150,000 to talk to you?" "Yes." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, and I watch my 16-year-old sister die a little more each day, so the bar's pretty high." The words should have stung. Instead, Dominic felt something like relief at her honesty. "I know how that sounds. I have a contract that makes it legitimate with explicit terms stating, 'I know what you're doing.'" She set the towels down, crossing her arms. You looked into me, didn't you? Found out about Lily? About the medical bills. You're not offering help, you're offering to exploit my desperation. I'm offering a solution that benefits us both. Benefits? Her voice rose, anger cracking through exhaustion. You get a pet to make you feel less lonely, and I get to sell my dignity to save my sister. That's not benefit, Mr. Blackwood. That's you buying someone who has no choice but to sell. She was right. Everything Raymond had said, everything his conscience screamed, all of it was right. This was wrong on every level that mattered. He should apologize again, leave, never speak to her again. $150,000, he said instead. That's the exact cost of the Northwestern trial, the immunotherapy that could save Lillian's life. You're working 3 jobs, and it's not enough. You'll never earn that much before she runs out of time. But I can give it to you. 1 week. That's all I'm asking. Tears welled in her eyes, angry and helpless. I hate you. I know. I hate that you're right. I hate that you looked into my life. I hate that you're giving me a choice that isn't really a choice at all. I know. She turned away, gripping the counter so hard her knuckles went white. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. What exactly would this week entail? Dominic pulled out his phone, forwarding her the contract Raymond had drafted. Read it. Think about it. I'm not asking for an answer now. When? You have until tomorrow night. If you decide yes, meet me at this address at 8 p.m. He wrote down the name of his attorney's office. If you don't show, I'll never bring this up again. I'll make an anonymous donation to Lillian's treatment fund, no strings attached. She looked at him finally, mascara streaking from escaped tears, and he'd never seen anyone look so broken and furious and exhausted all at once. Why are you doing this? She asked again. Because I'm 58 years old and I've forgotten how to be human. Because my daughter hates me and I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that mattered. Because you looked at money like it was worthless, and I needed to understand what you valued more. Because I can, he said, and because you need it. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the whole truth. She seemed to understand that, reading something in his face that made her expression shift from anger to something more complicated. If I say yes, she said slowly, there are conditions. Name them. Half the money transferred immediately to Chicago Memorial for Lillian's treatment. The other half held in escrow until the week is complete. Everything in writing. Complete confidentiality. Nobody can know about this arrangement, especially not Lily. And if I say stop at any point for any reason, it stops. No questions, no penalties. Dominic nodded, respect for her growing with each demand. She was protecting herself, protecting her sister, making sure this transaction had boundaries, even as it violated every boundary that mattered. Agreed, he said. Anything else? Yeah. She met his eyes, and he saw steel beneath the exhaustion. After this week is over, you disappear from my life. Completely. Forever. No checking in, no donations, no guilt-fueled charity. We're done. You get your week, I get Lily's treatment, and then we never see each other again. The finality in her voice should have been what he wanted, a clean transaction, no complications. Instead, it felt like a door slamming on something he hadn't known he was hoping for. Understood, he said. She picked up her towels, returning to work like he'd already vanished. Dominic stood there another moment, then turned and walked back through service corridors that suddenly felt less like an alternate world and more like a mirror of his own emptiness. In the penthouse, he poured whiskey and stared at his phone. The contract was sent. The offer was made. Now he could only wait to see if desperation would win over dignity, if a dying sister's needs would override a proud woman's principles. He hoped she'd say no. Hoped she'd find another way, prove that not everything could be bought. But he also hoped she'd say yes, because the alternative, spending another week in this beautiful prison, talking to people who only saw his money, felt unbearable. The contradiction was killing him. He wanted her to choose freely while knowing the choice itself was coercion. Wanted authenticity while bribing her for companionship. Wanted to help while exploiting her desperation. Raymond was right. He was an idiot. Worse, He was becoming the monster Victoria already believed him to be. His phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Lillian Hartley admitted to ICU. Status critical. Contact Dr. Patterson immediately. Dominic stared at the message, then called the number attached. A tired voice answered on the third ring. "This is Dominic Blackwood. I received a notification about Lillian Hartley." "Are you family?" "No, but I'm willing to guarantee payment for any treatment she needs." A pause. "Sir, with all due respect, her sister is already working herself to death to pay the bills, adding more debt. I'm not talking about debt. I'm talking about immediate transfer of funds for the Northwestern trial, whatever it costs. The trial costs $150,000 for initial treatment. Her sister was told the wait list is 6 months minimum. What if money wasn't an issue? What if I paid double to move her to the front?" Silence. Then carefully, "I'd need to verify funds before discussing that possibility. You'll have verification by end of business tomorrow. Just tell me if the money is there. Can you save her? The trial has a 70% success rate. It's her best chance." A pause. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what your relationship is to this family, but whatever you're planning." "I'm planning to save a 16-year-old girl's life. Everything else is secondary." He ended the call before the doctor could ask questions Dominic couldn't answer. Then he texted Raymond, "Transfer $150,000 to Chicago Memorial tomorrow 9 a.m. Lillian Hartley's account. Mark it as anonymous donation." The response came immediately. Before or after she agrees to the contract, Dominic looked at the question, understanding what Raymond was really asking. Was this bribe or charity, coercion or compassion? The line between them had blurred so completely he couldn't tell anymore. Before he typed, "Whether she agrees or not, transfer the money." A long pause. Then understood. Dominic set the phone down and returned to the windows, watching the city pulse with life he couldn't touch. Tomorrow Evangeline would learn her sister's treatment was paid for. She'd also learn the offer still stood 1 week of companionship for money she no longer desperately needed. If she said yes, then it would mean something different. Not desperation, but choice. Not coercion, but curiosity. Maybe even the beginning of trust. Or maybe she'd recognize it for what it was. A manipulative bastard trying to buy absolution along with companionship, trying to prove he could do good while still getting what he wanted. The whiskey bottle was half empty when his phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "This is Evangeline Hartley." Her voice was steady, more resolved than hope. "I got a call from the hospital. They said an anonymous donor paid for Lily's treatment. The trial starts tomorrow." "That's good news." "It was you." Not a question. Dominic didn't bother denying it. "Yes." "Why, I haven't agreed to anything. You could have used this as leverage." "I know. So why give away the one thing I desperately needed? You had me. I was going to say yes. And now—" "Now the choice is real," he interrupted. "If you say yes tomorrow, it won't be because your sister needs the money. It'll be because you want to. That matters to me." Silence stretched between them, filled with things neither could say. Finally she spoke, voice rough with tears he could hear but not see. "I'll be there tomorrow, 8 p.m. Not because I want to, I want you to know that, but because I'm curious why a man with everything would pay $150,000 just to feel less alone." "Fair enough. And Mr. Blackwood, thank you for Lily. Whatever else happens, whatever this week turns into, thank you for giving my sister a chance." The call ended. Dominic stood in the dark, phone still pressed to his ear, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with terror, possibility wrapped around guilt. Tomorrow Evangeline would walk into Raymond's office and sign a contract that would change both their lives. She'd do it freely, without the crushing weight of her sister's death forcing her hand. She'd do it because she chose to, even if the choice was shaped by curiosity instead of desire. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good. But it was more honest than anything he'd done in decades, and that had to count for something. Dominic finished the whiskey, set the glass down carefully, and went to bed. For the first time in months, sleep came easily pulled down by the strange comfort of having made a decision that might actually matter. Tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't predict. Tomorrow he'd sit across from a woman he'd essentially bribed into his life and try to pretend this was anything other than loneliness dressed up as charity. But tonight he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, desperation could transform into something real. The elevator to Raymond's office climbed 30 floors in silence that felt like judgment. Evangeline wore the same black dress from her mother's funeral, the only formal clothing she owned that didn't smell like disinfectant or cleaning chemicals. Her reflection in the polished doors showed a woman who'd aged 5 years in 3 hollows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide hands that trembled despite her best efforts to still them. The receptionist smiled with practiced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Pierce is expecting you. Conference room B." Raymond stood when she entered, extending a hand. She shook briefly before pulling away. His expression carried the careful neutrality of someone paid to facilitate transactions he didn't approve of. The contract waited on the table between them, pages of legal language designed to make this seem legitimate. "I've reviewed everything." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The terms are clear. Miss Hartley, before we proceed, are you certain you understand what you're agreeing to? 1 week of companionship. No sexual services required. $75,000 transferred to Chicago Memorial immediately, the remainder held in escrow pending completion. Complete confidentiality. Either party can terminate at any time without penalty." Raymond nodded slowly. "And you're entering this agreement of your own free will?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither could speak aloud. Was she doing this freely? Yes and no. Desperation had been removed from the equation, but curiosity, that toxic mix of fascination and fury, had taken its place. She wanted to understand why a man who could buy anything would pay for something as intangible as genuine conversation. "I'm here," she said simply. "That's answer enough." She signed on the indicated lines, each stroke of the pen feeling like a small death of principle. Raymond countersigned, then produced his phone to show the transfer confirmation. $75,000 already deposited to her sister's account. Blood money, salvation, both things at once. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this." Raymond slid a key card across the table. "Penthouse access. He'll expect you at 8 p.m. tonight." Evangeline pocketed the card without looking at it. "Anything else?" "Yes." Raymond's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern underneath. "Be careful. Dominic is complicated. He doesn't mean to be cruel, but loneliness makes people do desperate things. Don't let his desperation destroy you." The warning should have terrified her. Instead, it sparked something close to recognition. She understood desperation intimately, had lived with it so long it felt like a second skin. Maybe that was why she'd said yes. Not for the money anymore, but because she recognized a fellow drowning person reaching for anything that might keep them afloat. Chicago Memorial's oncology wing smelled like antiseptic and dying hope. Evangeline found Lily in her usual room, pale against white sheets, reading a book she'd read 5 times already because new ones cost money they didn't have. Her sister's face lit up when she saw her, then immediately shadowed with concern. "You look terrible," Lily said. "Did you sleep at all?" "I'm fine. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm made of glass and exhaustion." She set the book down, studying Evangeline with eyes too old for 16. "The doctor came by this morning. Said the trial starts tomorrow. Said an anonymous donor paid for everything." Evangeline's throat tightened. "That's good news. Is it you? Did you do something?" "It wasn't me." The lie came easily necessary. "Someone who heard about your case wanted to help. It happens sometimes." Lily's expression said she didn't believe it, but she was too tired to push. Instead, she reached for Evangeline's hand, squeezing with strength that belied her fragile appearance. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if it doesn't work? Then we try something else. We keep fighting. That's what we do." "But what if I'm tired of fighting? What if I just want to—" "Don't." Evangeline gripped her hand harder, probably too hard. "Don't you dare give up. Not now. Not when we're this close." Tears slipped down Lily's cheeks, and Evangeline climbed onto the bed beside her, holding her sister like she'd done when nightmares woke her after their parents died. They stayed that way until visiting hours ended two girls who'd lost too much, pretending they still had enough strength for one more battle. The penthouse at 8 p.m. looked different from the service corridors, intimidating in its perfection, designed to make visitors feel simultaneously privileged and inadequate. Dominic answered the door wearing slacks and a white button-down with sleeves rolled to his elbows, more casual than she'd ever seen him. It made him look almost approachable, almost human. "You came," he said, and she heard genuine surprise beneath the words. "We have a contract." She stepped past him into the sprawling space, taking in art that belonged in museums and furniture that cost more than her yearly salary. "I honor my agreements. Even ones you hate, especially those." She turned to face him, arms crossed defensively. "So how does this work? Do you want me to sit decoratively in the corner? Make small talk about the weather. Pretend I'm here because I want to be—" Something flickered across his expression. Pain, maybe, or recognition of her anger. He moved to the bar, pouring amber liquid into 2 glasses with practiced ease. "I want you to be honest," he said, offering her 1 glass. She took it but didn't drink. "I don't need pretense. I get enough of that everywhere else." "You want honesty?" The words came sharp, fueled by weeks of exhaustion and rage she'd buried beneath survival instinct. "Fine. I think this whole arrangement is pathetic. A grown man so lonely he has to buy companionship from someone desperate enough to sell it. I think you looked into my life, found my weakness, and exploited it even while pretending to help. I think you're exactly the kind of person who mistakes money for meaning and wonders why nothing feels real." She expected anger, defensiveness, the cold dismissal rich people deployed when challenged. Instead, Dominic's shoulders dropped slightly, and he smiled not with humor, but with something closer to relief. "There it is," he said quietly. "The truth everyone else is too polite or too greedy to say. You wanted honesty." "I did. I do." He gestured toward the leather couch. "Please sit. And before you ask, no, I don't expect you to do anything except exist in this space with me. Talk if you want. Stay silent if you prefer. Read, work, sleep. Whatever makes this bearable for you." Evangeline sat on the edge of the cushion, every muscle tense with the instinct to flee. Dominic settled in the chair opposite, maintaining distance that felt deliberate. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy, filled with everything neither could say. "Tell me about Harvard," he finally offered. "What did you study?" "You already know. You investigated me. I know the facts. I don't know what it meant to you. What you loved about it. What you sacrificed when you left." The question opened something she'd kept carefully locked. Against her better judgment, she found herself answering. "Comparative literature. I loved finding patterns in stories across cultures, seeing how humans tell the same truths in different languages. I wanted to teach, maybe become a professor. Spend my life helping people understand that literature isn't escapism, it's the most honest mirror we have." Dominic leaned forward slightly, and she saw genuine interest in his expression. "Why did you stop?" "You know why. Lily needed me more than I needed a degree." "That's not what I asked. I asked why you stopped. Not why you had to leave, but why you chose to stop. There's a difference." The observation cut deeper than she'd expected. Nobody had asked that before. Not doctors, not former classmates, not even Lily. Everyone assumed the choice was obvious, inevitable, that walking away from Harvard was pure sacrifice without complication. "Because guilt is easier than grief," she heard herself say. "If I stayed in school while Lily got sicker, I'd have blamed myself forever. But if I came home, threw everything away to be with her, at least then I could tell myself I'd done everything possible, even if it wasn't enough." Understanding crossed Dominic's face, the kind that came from personal recognition rather than sympathy. He took a long drink, then set his glass down with care. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 3 years, he said, voice rough with something that might have been pain. "Victoria. She's 32, brilliant, everything I hoped she'd become, and she thinks I'm a monster who chose money over family. She's not entirely wrong. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked for honesty. Because I want you to understand, I know what it's like to sacrifice the wrong things, to make choices that seem rational in the moment but hollow out everything that matters. He met her eyes across the space between them. I built an empire from $10,000 and relentless ambition. 28 years later, I can buy anything except a conversation with my own daughter. Can afford penthouses and private jets, but can't remember the last time someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a profit margin. Evangeline studied him, this man who'd invaded her life with money and manipulation, who'd bought her time while pretending to save her sister. She wanted to maintain her anger, cling to righteous fury that made this transaction feel less complicated. But his loneliness was so palpable it hurt to witness, and she recognized it because she'd been drowning in the same isolation for 3 years. "This won't fix you," she said quietly. "A week of purchased companionship won't cure whatever's broken inside you." "I know," he smiled sadly. "But maybe it'll help me remember what connection feels like. Even if it's artificial, even if it's temporary. Sometimes memory is enough to keep you going." The vulnerability in his admission cracked something in her chest. Against every instinct screaming to protect herself, she reached for her glass and took a drink. The whiskey burned sharp and clean, cutting through defenses she'd maintained since walking through the door. "Tell me about the empire," she said. "How does someone go from $10,000 to this?" His expression shifted, surprise replacing resignation. Whatever he'd expected from this evening, genuine curiosity apparently wasn't it. He started talking, and she discovered that beneath the loneliness was a mind she'd underestimated, sharp, strategic, capable of seeing patterns others missed. He explained leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, the way she'd analyzed Yeats finding poetry in spreadsheets, meaning in market movements. Time slipped past without notice. They talked through topics that should have bored her: commercial real estate, venture capital, the delicate balance between risk and reward that built fortunes. But Dominic made it human, connecting every decision to people affected by it, showing her how money was just another language for telling stories about power and survival. Somewhere around midnight, he taught her the basics of merger arbitrage sketching diagrams on a legal pad that appeared from nowhere. She found herself leaning forward, asking questions, challenging his assumptions with literary theory that surprisingly applied to market psychology. He actually laughed when she compared corporate takeovers to narrative structure, seeing patterns he'd never considered. "You would have been brilliant in business," he said, eyes bright with engagement she suspected he rarely showed. "That mind, that ability to see connections, most of my analysts can't think that strategically." "Maybe. But literature teaches you something business forgets." "What's that?" "That humans are fundamentally irrational. We make decisions based on emotion and justify them with logic. Markets might follow patterns, but people were chaos pretending to be order." She held his gaze, feeling brave enough to push. "That's why you're lonely, isn't it? You optimized everything for profit and forgot that connection requires irrationality, requires choosing people even when the spreadsheet says it's a bad investment." The observation landed hard. She watched him absorb it, saw the moment it connected to truths he'd been avoiding. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that made her chest tight. "My first wife left when I was 30, he said. "I'd just lost everything in a deal that went bad. We were broke, living in a studio apartment, surviving on ramen and hope. She looked at me one morning and said she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't watch me chase impossible dreams while we drowned in debt. I told her I'd make it work, that I just needed time. She said time was all she'd given me, and she was done investing in futures that never materialized. But you succeeded anyway." "I did. Built everything back and more. Proved her wrong in every way that mattered on paper." His smile carried no victory. "Except she was right about the important part. I chose the empire over everything else." Second wife, Victoria. "Everyone who tried to get close, I optimized them away for quarterly earnings and market dominance. And now I'm 58 years old, surrounded by luxury, completely alone, because I forgot that some things can't be bought or leveraged or acquired through strategic planning." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes, recognizing his pain too clearly. "I did the same thing. Different choices, but same result. I optimized for Lily's survival and forgot that I'm a person too. Forgot that maybe she needs a sister who's whole more than a martyr who's broken. "We're both idiots," Dominic said softly. "Completely." They sat in shared understanding, two people who'd sacrificed everything important on different altars, discovering that loneliness looked the same, regardless of bank balance. The moment stretched fragile and honest until Evangeline's exhaustion caught up with her all at once. She yawned, tried to hide it, failed. "You're tired," Dominic said, standing. "There's a guest room." "I should go home." "It's past midnight, please. The guest room is yours for the week anyway, part of the arrangement. Use it or don't, but at least rest here tonight. You look ready to collapse." Pride warred with practical exhaustion. Practical won. She followed him down a hallway to a room larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites that felt like luxury and prison simultaneously. "Anything you need, just ask," he said from the doorway. "Breakfast is at 7 if you want it. Otherwise sleep as long as you like." "Dominic." The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for their arrangement. He turned, waiting. "Thank you, for Lily. Whatever else this is, whatever complicated mess we've created, thank you for giving her a chance." His expression softened into something that looked almost like hope. "You're welcome, Evangeline. Sleep well." The door closed, leaving her alone in borrowed luxury she'd resent in the morning. But tonight, she let herself sink into sheets that cost more than her monthly rent, closed her eyes, and slept without nightmares for the first time in months. Morning brought confusion, waking in unfamiliar space, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere distant. Reality crashed back in waves, the contract, the money the week she'd sold to a lonely billionaire who'd paid for her sister's life. Evangeline found Dominic in the kitchen, actually cooking. Not reheating takeout or directing staff, but genuinely standing at a stove making eggs. The domestic image jarred against everything she'd assumed about him. "You cook?" "I learned when I was broke. Never forgot how." He gestured toward the coffee maker. "There's fresh coffee. Breakfast in 5 minutes if you're hungry." She poured coffee, watching him move through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Where's your staff?" "I gave them the week off. Told them I needed privacy for a business retreat." He plated eggs, perfectly added toast he'd somehow managed not to burn. "I figured you wouldn't want witnesses to whatever this arrangement becomes." The consideration surprised her. Most wealthy people she'd encountered through the hotel treated staff as furniture, present, but invisible, convenient, but irrelevant. Dominic had thought about her comfort, her dignity, in ways she hadn't expected. They ate in companionable silence, and Evangeline discovered the eggs were actually good. Whatever else Dominic Blackwood was, he could handle himself in a kitchen. The realization made him more human, less like the untouchable CEO who'd invaded her life with money and need. "I have meetings this afternoon," he said, clearing plates with the same efficiency he'd cooked. "You're welcome to stay here or come with me if you want. No pressure either way." "Come with you." "To the office. Board meetings, conference calls, the usual Monday chaos. You mentioned being curious about the business. I thought you might find it interesting." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his expression. "Or you could spend the day however you want. Read, sleep, explore the city. This week is yours as much as mine." Evangeline considered. The smart choice was maintaining distance, treating this like the transaction it was. But curiosity, that dangerous trait that had defined her academic career, whispered that maybe she could learn something, understand the world Dominic inhabited, see if the loneliness she'd witnessed was genuine or performance. "I'll come," she heard herself say. "But I'm not dressing up like arm candy. I wear what I want." His smile carried genuine warmth. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Blackwood Capital occupied 15 floors of glass and steel that screamed success. Employees moved through spaces designed to inspire productivity through intimidation. Everything sharp angles and cold efficiency designed by people who'd forgotten humans worked there. Dominic moved through it like a king through his kingdom, acknowledged but never truly seen power, making him invisible in different ways than poverty made Evangeline invisible. The morning meeting involved 12 executives arguing about commercial property in Boston, foreclosure opportunities, market timing, risk analysis that would have bored her if Dominic hadn't kept leaning over to explain the subtext. Who was positioning for promotion? Which numbers were inflated to hide mistakes? The human drama beneath business language that suddenly made everything fascinating. "Mr. Roberts is lying about the occupancy rates," she whispered during a particularly heated exchange. "His left eye twitches every time he mentions tenant retention." Dominic studied Roberts, then glanced at the spreadsheet with new scrutiny. 5 minutes later, he'd exposed the discrepancy numbers that didn't match reality projections built on wishful thinking rather than data. Roberts stammered, tried to explain, ultimately admitted to padding figures to meet quarterly targets. "We'll discuss this in my office," Dominic said, voice cold enough to frost the windows. Everyone else meeting adjourned. As the room emptied, Raymond approached with expression carefully neutral. "Who's your friend?" "Evangeline Hartley. She's consulting on human resources analysis." Raymond's eyebrow rose fractionally. He knew exactly who she was and what her presence meant. But professional discretion kept him silent beyond extending a hand. "Welcome to Blackwood Capital, Miss Hartley." She shook it, reading judgment and concern in equal measure. Raymond Pierce didn't approve of their arrangement, but he'd facilitate it anyway because that's what loyalty bought. The afternoon brought conference calls with Tokyo, London, Dubai international markets that existed only as voices through speakers, numbers on screens. Evangeline listened, fascinated by how Dominic shifted between languages and cultural contexts, adapting his approach to each market's expectations while maintaining core strategy. It was performance art disguised as business, and she found herself taking mental notes like she'd analyzed literature. Between calls, he asked her opinion, actually asked, genuinely listening when she pointed out psychological patterns in negotiation tactics, human elements his team had missed while focusing on pure numbers. She suggested reframing a London proposal to emphasize partnership over acquisition. Dominic tried it, and the deal closed 15 minutes later. "You just saved us $3 million in legal fees," he said after hanging up. "That partnership angle they were stalling because the original offer felt like colonization. You saw what my entire team missed." Pride warmed through her chest before she could stop it. "Literature teaches you to read subtext. Business is just another narrative. I'm starting to think Harvard lost something valuable when you left." The compliment shouldn't have mattered. This was still a transaction, still a week she'd sold because circumstances left no real choice. But Dominic's respect felt genuine, not patronizing, not performative, but actual recognition of competence from someone who valued capability. It made her remember who she'd been before exhaustion and grief had ground her down to nothing but survival instinct. Evening came too fast. They returned to the penthouse, and Evangeline expected awkwardness, the uncomfortable intimacy of spending evening hours with someone she barely knew. Instead, Dominic handed her a book she'd mentioned loving in college, a first edition she'd never been able to afford. "I had my assistant track it down this afternoon," he said. "Thought you might enjoy rereading it." She stared at the volume, throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. "This cost thousands of dollars. It's just money. Consider it a thank you for saving the London deal." "I can't accept." "You already accepted $75,000 for your time. A book is nothing compared to that." His expression softened. "Besides, it's not about the cost. It's about giving you something you'd never buy yourself. Something that might remind you who you were before survival became your only priority." The observation cut deep, exposing truths she'd avoided examining. When had she stopped reading for pleasure? When had everything become utilitarian, stripped of beauty and meaning, reduced to getting through each day without collapsing? She'd sacrificed more than Harvard. She'd sacrificed herself. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the book like a lifeline. "This means more than you know." They spent the evening in separate corners, her curled on the couch, reading, him working through emails on his laptop, existing together without needing constant interaction. The quiet felt comfortable in ways Evangeline hadn't anticipated, two lonely people finding unexpected peace in shared space. Around 11, her phone rang. Hospital. Her stomach dropped even before she answered. Dr. Patterson's voice carried careful calm that terrified her more than panic would have. "Miss Hartley, we need you to come in. Lillian's had a reaction to the first treatment. She's stable, but we need to discuss options." The world tilted. Evangeline heard herself say she'd be there immediately, ended the call with hands shaking so badly the phone nearly fell. Dominic was already standing, keys in hand. "I'll drive you." "You don't need to." "Evangeline." He stepped closer and she saw genuine concern beneath his usual control. "Let me help, please." The drive to Chicago Memorial passed in blur city lights, smearing through tears. She couldn't stop Dominic's presence solid beside her, not offering empty platitudes, but simply being there. The oncology wing welcomed them with fluorescent brightness and antiseptic smell, Dr. Patterson meeting them outside Lily's room. "She's resting now," he explained, tablet showing charts Evangeline couldn't process through fear. "The first treatment triggered an allergic response. Nothing life-threatening, but it means we need to adjust the protocol. Try a different formulation." "Will it work?" "We won't know until we try. But Miss Hartley—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this might not be enough. The trial offers the best chance, but it's not guaranteed. You understand that?" She understood, had always understood. But hope was easier than acceptance, and she'd clung to it so hard her hands bled from the grip. Dominic's hand found hers, warm and steady. "What can we do?" "Keep trying, stay hopeful, and—" Dr. Patterson looked at Evangeline with compassion that made her chest ache. "Take care of yourself. She needs you healthy, not running yourself into the ground." They let her sit with Lily, who slept through the crisis with pharmaceutical peace. Evangeline held her sister's hand, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, and felt the weight of 3 years crash down at once. She'd sacrificed everything: school, career, her own life, and it still might not be enough. The universe didn't care about sacrifice, didn't reward martyrdom with miracles. Dominic waited outside, giving her privacy for grief she couldn't fully express. When she finally emerged an hour later, exhausted and hollow, he simply opened his arms. She walked into them without thinking, let herself be held while her carefully constructed strength finally crumbled. "I can't lose her," she said against his chest. "She's all I have left." "You won't. We'll find a way." "You can't promise that. Money doesn't fix everything." "No." His arms tightened around her. "But it buys time. Options. The best doctors and treatments available. And sometimes that's enough." She pulled back, looking up at his face that somehow felt familiar despite knowing him barely 72 hours. "Why do you care? This wasn't part of the contract. Maybe I'm tired of standing by while people suffer just because I can afford not to care." His thumb brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Or maybe you've reminded me what it's like to feel something real. Either way, I'm not abandoning you in this. Whatever happens, we face it together." The promise terrified and comforted simultaneously. She'd been alone so long that accepting help felt like failure, like admitting she couldn't handle everything through sheer will. But exhaustion made her honest, and she recognized the same exhaustion in Dominic, both of them drowning separately, discovering that maybe together they could keep each other afloat. "Take me home," she said quietly. "Back to the penthouse. I can't go back to my apartment tonight." He drove through midnight Chicago City, sprawling around them like testament to human persistence. The penthouse welcomed them with warm lighting and expensive silence, comfort she'd resented yesterday but desperately needed tonight. "I'll make tea," Dominic offered, "or something stronger if you prefer. Whiskey, neat, the way you drink it." He poured 2 glasses and they sat on the couch with careful space between them that gradually closed as exhaustion overrode propriety. She ended up leaning against him, his arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at Chicago lights and not speaking because words felt inadequate to the moment. "My ex-wife was right," Dominic said eventually. "I chose the empire over everything that mattered, convinced myself that success would justify the sacrifices, that money could replace connection. Took me 28 years to realize I'd won everything and lost myself. I did the opposite, sacrificed everything for connection and lost myself anyway." She took a long drink, welcoming the burn. "Maybe we're both idiots for thinking we could control outcomes. Maybe life just happens and we make choices that seem rational until hindsight shows us how wrong we were." Or maybe we were both doing the best we could with impossible situations, and beating ourselves up for being human is just another form of self-destruction. The observation struck something deep. Evangeline turned to look at him properly, seeing past the money and power to the man beneath, flawed, lonely, trying to make sense of choices that had brought him here. He met her gaze and something shifted between them, the transactional arrangement transforming into something neither had anticipated. "This week was supposed to be simple," she whispered. "A business deal. Time for money, no complications. Nothing about this is simple." His hand came up to brush hair from her face, touch gentle enough to make her breath catch. "You terrify me, Evangeline. You make me feel things I thought I'd optimized away. Make me remember what it's like to care about something more than quarterly earnings. You terrify me too. You're everything I should hate: wealthy, powerful, the kind of person who thinks money solves problems. But you see me, not as staff or charity case or transaction. You see me, and I don't know what to do with that." The space between them disappeared. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly they were kissing, desperate and gentle, simultaneously, mouths meeting with the inevitability of people who'd been drowning separately and found unexpected air. His hands cradled her face like something precious. Hers gripped his shoulders like an anchor. They broke apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other with dawning realization of what they'd just done. The contract explicitly prohibited this, but the contract was already meaningless, had been from the moment genuine connection replaced purchased companionship. "We shouldn't," she said, even as her fingers traced his jaw. "This complicates everything." "I know." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But maybe complications are what we both need. Maybe perfect control is what got us here in the first place." She knew he was right, knew this was reckless and foolish and would probably end badly. But she was tired of being strong, tired of sacrificing, tired of existing instead of living. For once she wanted to make the irrational choice bet on the messy human connection instead of safe isolation. "1 week," she breathed against his lips. "We have 4 more days. After that we figure it out. Together." The promise felt impossible and necessary. They kissed again, and Evangeline let herself fall into the temporary reprieve from loneliness, knowing that when the week ended, reality would crash back with devastating force. But tonight, she chose irrationality, chose connection over safety, chose to be human instead of survival machine. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight brought peace. She hadn't felt in 3 years, held in the arms of a man who understood that sometimes the best choices looked like disasters waiting to happen. The next 3 days blurred into something Evangeline had no vocabulary to describe. Mornings found them sharing breakfast like actual partners, not employer and employee, not billionaire and hired companion, but 2 people discovering they liked each other's company. Dominic taught her the nuances of market psychology, while she introduced him to deconstructionist literary theory, finding unexpected overlap in how both disciplines understood human behavior. They argued about everything: politics, art, whether Chicago pizza was actually pizza, and the friction felt alive in ways her previous relationships never had. Afternoons, she accompanied him to Blackwood Capital, sitting in on meetings where her observations about body language and subtext saved deals, his analysts nearly torpedoed with pure data focus. The board members stopped questioning her presence after she identified an embezzlement scheme hidden in quarterly reports, pattern recognition from studying narrative structure revealing what forensic accountants had missed. Dominic introduced her as a consultant, and nobody pressed for details because results spoke louder than credentials. Evenings brought hospital visits that Dominic never suggested skipping. He'd wait in the cafeteria while she sat with Lily, who was responding better to the adjusted treatment protocol, color returning to her cheeks in increments too small to trust, but too significant to ignore. When Evangeline emerged exhausted and cautiously hopeful, Dominic would be there with coffee and quiet understanding, driving them back to the penthouse where they'd fall into bed together, sometimes making love with desperate intensity, sometimes just holding each other until sleep came. Wednesday morning shattered the fragile peace. Evangeline's phone exploded with notifications while she showered, and when she emerged, Dominic stood at the windows with his back rigid, holding his phone like it might detonate. His reflection in the glass showed fury barely contained beneath professional composure. What happened? He turned, and she saw something she hadn't witnessed before, fear lurking behind the anger. We're on page 6. Someone leaked photos of us together outside the hospital. The headline is, "Creative." He handed her the phone. The image showed them embracing in the parking lot. Monday night, her face pressed against his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. The caption made her stomach drop. Billionaire Blackwood's mystery woman, new romance, or opportunistic gold digger. The article was worse. Speculation about their age difference, her background as hotel staff, the timing suspiciously close to her sister's expensive treatment beginning. It stopped just short of calling her a prostitute, but the implication hung heavy in every carefully phrased paragraph. "They don't have our names," Dominic said, voice tight with controlled rage. "Yet. But it's only a matter of time. Whoever leaked this has access to more information. They're just parceling it out for maximum damage." Who would do this? Someone who wants me gone from Blackwood Capital. Someone who knows this kind of scandal gives the board ammunition to force me out. His jaw clenched. "I have a meeting in 2 hours. Emergency session. They're going to ask about you, and I need to decide how much truth to tell." Evangeline's mind raced through implications. If their arrangement went public, the contract, the money, the explicit terms, it would destroy them both. Her as a woman desperate enough to sell companionship, him as a predator who'd exploited that desperation. Lily would see the headlines, understand what her sister had done to save her. The thought made bile rise in Evangeline's throat. "Tell them I'm nobody," she said quickly. "A friend. A mistake. Whatever story protects Blackwood Capital. I'll disappear. The contract has termination clauses." "No." Dominic's voice cut sharp as breaking glass. "I'm not throwing you to the wolves to save my reputation. This isn't about reputation. It's about reality. You have an empire at stake. I have nothing to lose that I haven't already sacrificed. You think I care about the company more than—" He stopped, breathing hard, something wild moving behind his eyes. "Evangeline, in 4 days, you've reminded me what it means to feel human, to care about something beyond profit margins. I'm not giving that up because someone wants to weaponize connection into scandal." "Then what do we do?" His phone rang before he could answer. Raymond's name flashed on the screen. Dominic answered on speaker, and his attorney's voice filled the penthouse with barely controlled panic. "The board knows. Someone sent them the contract redacted but enough details to confirm the arrangement. They're voting to remove you as CEO at the meeting unless you can provide an explanation that doesn't make this look like you paid for sexual services from an employee." "She was never an employee," Dominic snapped. The contract makes it worse. You paid a desperate woman whose sister needed expensive medical treatment. Semantics about sexual services don't matter when the optics are this bad. They have everything, Dominic. The hospital transfers her employment records timeline matching her sister's treatment. Whoever leaked this built an airtight narrative that you're either a predator or suffering mental breakdown. Either way, you're out. Evangeline felt the room tilt. This was her fault. Her presence in his life, her acceptance of money. She should have refused her weakness in saying yes to a deal that was always going to explode. She'd destroyed him trying to save her sister, and the irony was vicious enough to choke on. "Raymond, I need options." "There aren't any. Unless you can prove this relationship is genuine, and nobody's going to believe that given the circumstances, the board votes you out. Victoria's already rallying support, claiming you're unfit to lead." Victoria, the daughter who'd stopped speaking to him 3 years ago, now orchestrating his removal. Evangeline saw Dominic's face go carefully blank, the mask he wore when emotion became liability. But she'd learned to read the micro-expressions beneath the flicker of betrayal, the deep cut of knowing his own child was the one destroying him. "Schedule the meeting for 2 p.m., Dominic said, voice emptied of everything except cold calculation. "I'll be there." He ended the call and stood motionless at the windows, staring at the city he'd conquered that was now turning against him. Evangeline wanted to comfort him, offer hollow reassurances that this would work out. but she'd learned he valued honesty over optimism, hard truths over pretty lies. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "I should never have agreed to the contract. Should have found another way." "There was no other way. We both know that." "Then I should leave now. Disappear before the meeting. Make it look like you ended things when you realized how it appeared. Salvage what you can." He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. "Do you want to leave?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that terrified her. Wanting had nothing to do with it. They'd known each other less than a week, built connection on foundation of transaction and desperation. This wasn't love. Couldn't be love. Love required time and trust and basis in something more substantial than mutual loneliness. Except it felt like love. Felt like coming home after years of wandering, finding someone who saw past her exhaustion to the person she'd been before grief ground her down. Felt like being valued for her mind instead of pitied for her circumstances. Felt like maybe she deserved happiness instead of endless sacrifice. "What I want doesn't matter," she finally answered. "Not when staying destroys everything you've built. Everything I've built is meaningless without something real to build it for." He crossed to her hands, framing her face with gentleness that contradicted the intensity in his eyes. "I spent 28 years optimizing for success and forgot to optimize for meaning. You gave me meaning. In less than a week, you reminded me what it's like to care about someone more than quarterly earnings. I'm not giving that up to save a company that's already cost me my daughter. Dominic, I love you." The words came raw, unpolished, nothing like the calculated statements he delivered in boardrooms. "I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Evangeline, and I'd rather lose everything than pretend I don't." The confession shattered something inside her, the careful distance she'd maintained, the walls she'd built to survive this arrangement without getting hurt. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped his wrists, holding on to him like an anchor in a storm she hadn't seen coming. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "Throwing away an empire for someone you met less than a week ago. That's not love, that's temporary insanity." "Then I choose insanity over the alternative." She kissed him because words felt inadequate, poured everything she couldn't say into the desperate press of lips against lips. They made love on the couch, with cities sprawling below them, witness to recklessness disguised as romance. When they finished, tangled together and breathing hard, Evangeline knew with absolute certainty that this would end badly. But she also knew she'd make the same choice again, because feeling this alive was worth whatever destruction followed. The emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. in Blackwood Capital's main conference room. 13 people sat around the table, board members who'd profited from Dominic's leadership for decades, now prepared to destroy him over optics and scandal. Victoria sat at the far end, face professionally neutral, betraying nothing of the knife she'd planted between her father's ribs. Dominic entered alone. He'd insisted Evangeline stay at the penthouse, protecting her from the spectacle about to unfold. She'd argued wanting to face this together, but he'd been immovable. This was his company, his reputation, his war to fight. Gerald Whitmore called the meeting to order with perfunctory efficiency. "Mr. Blackwood, we've received information suggesting you entered into an inappropriate financial arrangement with a civilian. Before we proceed to vote, we're offering you opportunity to explain." Dominic remained standing, hands resting on the table edge, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. When he reached Victoria, he held her gaze until she looked away. "I met Evangeline Hartley 6 days ago," he began, voice carrying the commanding presence that had built this empire. "She was working housekeeping at the hotel where I've been living since my divorce. I was immediately struck by her intelligence, her strength, her refusal to be impressed by money or status. I investigated her background. Yes, an invasion of privacy I don't excuse, and discovered she was supporting a terminally ill sister while working 3 jobs. He paused, letting the room absorb this. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. "I offered her employment, a week of companionship in exchange for compensation that would cover her sister's medical treatment. The contract explicitly prohibited sexual services. I wanted conversation with someone who saw me as a person instead of a profit center. She agreed because her sister was dying and she had no other options. That makes me either a savior or a predator depending on your perspective. Which are you? Victoria's voice cut across the room sharp with accusation. Because from where I sit, this looks like you exploiting a desperate woman for your own emotional gratification. Exactly the kind of selfish calculation you're famous for. The room went silent. Father and daughter stared at each other across the table, years of unspoken pain crystallizing into this moment of public confrontation. You're right, Dominic said quietly, and shock rippled through the assembled executives. I did exploit her desperation. Told myself I was helping while really buying something I couldn't earn honestly. Everything you think about me, that I prioritize my own needs over everyone else's well-being, you're absolutely correct. Victoria's expression flickered with surprise. She'd clearly expected denial, defensive justification. Confession disarmed her. But here's what you don't know. Dominic continued, gaze sweeping the room. In the 4 days since that arrangement began, Evangeline has saved this company $23 million through insights your entire analytical team missed. She identified embezzlement in the finance department, exposed inflated projections that would have led to catastrophic investment, and closed the London deal my negotiators were about to lose. She did this because she's brilliant, not because I'm paying her. She did it because she cares about competence and integrity, traits this company was built on and seems to have forgotten. He straightened, voice hardening. So yes, the arrangement began as exploitation, but it became something real, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I'm in love with her, and if you want to remove me as CEO because I finally prioritized human connection over profit margins, then you're exactly the kind of leadership this company doesn't need. The silence that followed felt absolute. Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly. Mr. Blackwood, you understand this puts us in a difficult position. The optics? I don't give a damn about optics. Dominic's hands flattened on the table, leaning forward with intensity that made several board members flinch. I built this company from 10,000 borrowed dollars, sacrificed my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, 28 years of my life, to make all of you wealthy beyond measure. And now you're going to vote me out because I fell in love with someone you deem inappropriate. Then do it. Cast your votes. But know that you're choosing appearance over substance, just like I did for decades, until Evangeline reminded me what actually matters. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, sliding it across the table to Gerald. My resignation effective immediately. I'm stepping down as CEO. Raymond Pierce will assume leadership. He has the competence and integrity this position requires. I'm retaining my shares but relinquishing operational control. You can accept this gracefully or force it through vote, but either way I'm done. The room erupted into chaos. Board members arguing, Victoria staring in shock, Gerald reading the resignation with disbelief clear on his face. Dominic ignored all of it, turning toward the door. Wait, Victoria's voice stopped him. You're serious. You're actually giving up Blackwood Capital for a woman you met less than a week ago. He looked back at his daughter, and the rawness in his expression could have filled volumes. I'm giving it up because it cost me everything that mattered, Victoria, including you. I won't make that mistake again. You don't know her. This is temporary insanity brought on by depression and loneliness. In 6 months you'll regret throwing away everything you built. Maybe. He smiled sadly. But I've spent 28 years regretting choosing the company over people I loved. At least this time I'll regret something worth choosing. Victoria's professional mask cracked, revealing pain beneath. And what about me? Do I factor into this calculation at all? Or am I just collateral damage like I've always been? The question stopped Dominic completely. He crossed back to the table, stopping across from his daughter, hands gripping the chair edge with visible effort to contain emotion. You were never collateral damage. You were the cost I didn't realize I was paying until the bill came due. His voice roughened. I chose building this empire over attending your recitals, your graduations, the moments that mattered. Told myself I was providing for your future while missing your present. Your mother left because I couldn't see past spreadsheets to the people I claimed to love. And you stopped speaking to me because I taught you everything about success and nothing about being human. Tears tracked down Victoria's face despite her attempt to maintain composure. You chose money over family. Every single time. I did, and I can't undo that. Can't give you back the father you deserved instead of the CEO I became. But I can stop making that choice now. Can show you that people matter more than profit even if it's 28 years too late. The vulnerability in his admission broke something in Victoria's expression. She stood abruptly, walking around the table to face her father directly. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Grief and anger and longing mixing into complicated emotion, neither seemed equipped to process. "I leaked the photos," she said quietly, and the room collectively inhaled. "Not the contract, I don't know who did that, but the page 6 story came from me. I saw you with her at the hospital looking happier than I'd seen you in years, and I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand that some stranger got the version of you I'd begged for my entire childhood." Dominic absorbed this confession with visible effort. "Victoria, but watching you just now choosing her over the company you built." She wiped tears roughly. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you actually learned something." The hope in her voice was fragile enough to shatter with wrong words. Dominic seemed to understand this, responding with careful honesty. "I'm learning. Too late for us maybe, but I'm trying. And if you're willing to let me prove it, not with money or grand gestures, but with actual presence, I'd like to try being your father instead of your CEO." Victoria's composure finally broke completely. She stepped forward and Dominic opened his arms, and father and daughter embraced with the desperation of people who'd been starving for connection they'd convinced themselves they didn't need. The board members looked away, granting privacy to a moment too raw for witnesses. When they separated, both wiping tears, Victoria's expression had shifted from antagonist to something approaching ally. "She must be pretty special, this Evangeline, to make you actually choose something over quarterly earnings." "She is. She reminds me that life is supposed to mean something beyond accumulation. That success without connection is just expensive loneliness." He paused, then took the risk vulnerability demanded. "I'd like you to meet her. Not as business associate or scandal, but as the woman I love, if you're willing." Victoria considered this war between resentment and curiosity playing across her face. Finally she nodded. "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Somewhere public so I can't throw things if she turns out to be awful." Relief and joy mixed in Dominic's expression. "Thank you. For giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." "You definitely don't deserve it. But apparently I inherited your tendency toward bad decisions." Her smile took some sting from the words. "Now get out of here. Go tell your girlfriend you just sacrificed an empire for her. Make it romantic or whatever." Dominic kissed her forehead, the first paternal gesture in 3 years, and left the conference room with lighter step than he'd entered. The board sat in stunned silence until Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat. "I suppose we need to vote on accepting the resignation and confirming Mr. Pierce as interim CEO." "I vote we accept and move on," Victoria said, voice resuming professional distance. "And I suggest we keep the details of this meeting confidential. What happened here was family business that has no place in shareholder reports." The vote passed unanimously. Raymond Pierce became CEO of Blackwood Capital while Dominic Blackwood walked out of the building he'd spent 28 years constructing, heading towards something he'd spent less than a week discovering was more valuable than all of it combined. Evangeline was pacing the penthouse when he returned, phone gripped tight enough to hurt, having watched the entire meeting through Raymond's covert feed. She launched herself at him the moment he walked through the door, and he caught her easily holding tight while she trembled against him. "You're insane," she said into his shoulder. "Completely, certifiably insane." "I told you I was choosing insanity." She pulled back to look at him, searching his face for regret or doubt. Finding neither, finding only peace, mixed with exhaustion and something that might have been liberation. "You gave up everything." "I gave up a company. I kept everything that actually matters." His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I love you, Evangeline, and I'd make this choice 1,000 times if it meant building a life that's actually worth living. We barely know each other, This could crash and burn in spectacular fashion. It could, probably will. Most things worth doing come with high risk of catastrophic failure. He kissed her softly. But I've spent 28 years optimizing for safe returns and ended up with profitable emptiness. I'd rather bet on something real and lose than win at something meaningless. The words should have terrified her, should have triggered every survival instinct she'd honed through 3 years of constant crisis management. Instead, they felt like permission to want something beyond mere survival, to choose messy connection over safe isolation. I love you too, she admitted the confession, feeling dangerous and necessary. And I have no idea what we're doing or how this works, but I'm tired of being smart, tired of making only rational choices. For once, I want to be completely recklessly stupid. Then let's be stupid together. They spent the afternoon breaking the news to Lily, who responded with surprising enthusiasm. Apparently, she'd been rooting for this relationship from the moment Evangeline accidentally mentioned Dominic's name and fielding calls from Raymond, who was already thriving in his new role implementing changes Dominic had been too attached to tradition to consider. That evening brought the hospital call they'd been hoping for. Doctor. Patterson's voice carried cautious optimism Evangeline had learned not to trust too quickly. Miss Hartley Lillian's responding exceptionally well to the adjusted protocol. Her numbers are the best we've seen since diagnosis. If this continues, we're looking at remission within 6 months. Remission. The word hung in Evangeline's mind like a dream she was afraid to believe. Lily wasn't cured. Leukemia never truly disappeared, always lurking for potential return. But remission meant life, meant futures instead of endings, meant the sacrifice and desperation and impossible choices might actually result in something beyond prolonged dying. They went to the hospital, immediately found Lily sitting up in bed, reading the first edition book Dominic had given Evangeline, looking more alive than she had in months. Her smile when they entered could have powered the city. "Dr. Patterson says I'm going to make it," she said, voice steady with belief Evangeline had worried she'd lost. "Says in 6 months I might actually get to leave this place." Evangeline collapsed into the chair beside her bed, overwhelmed by relief too massive to contain. Dominic stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, solid presence grounding her, while the world tilted toward something that might actually be hope. "You're going to make it," she repeated, testing the words like unfamiliar language. "You're actually going to make it." Apparently stubbornness is genetic. Lily looked past her to Dominic. "Thank you for the treatment, for taking care of my sister when she forgot how to take care of herself, for being decent when you could have been awful." He moved around the chair, sitting on the bed edge with the careful gentleness of someone unused to being around the sick. "Your sister saved me before I saved her. Fair trade. She has that effect on people. Makes them remember they're human instead of just surviving machines." Lily took Evangeline's hand, squeezing with strength that felt miraculous. "I'm sorry I got sick. Sorry you had to sacrifice Harvard and your future and everything you wanted, but I'm going to make it worth it, I promise. Going to do something amazing with this second chance. You being alive is amazing enough." "Nope, not good enough." Determination flashed across Lily's face. Familiar stubbornness that had kept her fighting when giving up would have been easier. "I'm going to medical school. Going to become an oncologist. Going to save other people's siblings the way you saved me. That's my promise." The declaration made Evangeline's throat tight. She'd spent 3 years watching her sister diminish, shrinking into illness, until personality disappeared beneath survival. Seeing her emerge now, seeing dreams resurface, seeing futures bloom where there'd been only desperate present felt like witnessing resurrection. "Deal," she managed. "You become an oncologist, I'll finish my literature degree. We'll both stop just surviving and actually live." Lily's smile could have lit the entire hospital. "I love you, sister. I love you too. So much." They stayed until visiting hours ended, then drove back through Chicago streets that somehow looked different, less like battleground, more like possibility. The penthouse welcomed them with warmth that felt earned instead of purchased, home built on foundation of honest connection rather than expensive isolation. "What happens now?" Evangeline asked as they stood at the windows watching the city pulse with life they could finally touch. "You're not CEO anymore. I'm not working 3 jobs, our contracted weekends tomorrow. What do we do with all this freedom?" Dominic turned her to face him, hands gentle on her waist. "We figure it out together. I'm thinking about teaching business ethics at Northwestern, giving back instead of just taking. You finish your degree, become the professor you were meant to be. We build something that matters instead of just something profitable." "That sounds terrifyingly normal." "It does. Want to try it anyway?" She thought about the question, seriously examining the life he was offering from all angles. It could fail spectacularly. Relationships built in crisis often crumbled when normal replaced desperate. They could discover that without pressure forcing them together, they had nothing sustainable to build on. 6 months from now, they might be strangers who'd shared a week of beautiful delusion. But they might also discover that what they'd built was real. That connection formed under pressure could withstand the test of ordinary existence. That choosing each other every day was more meaningful than the dramatic gesture that brought them together. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's try terrifyingly normal." He kissed her, and the city sprawled below them, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither could anticipate. But tonight, they had each other, and the radical possibility that maybe, just maybe, betting everything on connection instead of control was the smartest decision either had ever made. 3 months later, Evangeline walked across a stage to receive her Harvard diploma, completed online while working part-time as Dominic's research assistant at Northwestern. Lily sat in the front row beside Victoria, who'd become unexpected ally in building the blended family nobody had planned. Dominic stood recording on his phone, pride evident in every frame. 6 months after the week that changed everything, Lily's scans came back clear. Remission officially declared, future stretching ahead like a gift. They celebrated at the restaurant where Dominic and Evangeline had their first official date, not as transaction, but as choice. A year later, Dominic proposed in the hotel corridor where they'd first met. No grand gesture. Just a man kneeling in fluorescent light, asking if she'd consider making the temporary permanent. Evangeline said yes without hesitation because she'd learned that some risks were worth taking. They married at City Hall on a Tuesday afternoon, witnessed by Raymond and Victoria and Lily. The celebration happened in the penthouse that had transformed from prison to home. No media coverage, no shareholders to impress, just people who'd learned that success without meaning was expensive loneliness. Standing at the windows that evening, husband and wife watching Chicago pulse with possibility, Evangeline understood something she'd been too afraid to admit during that desperate week. Sometimes the worst decisions, the reckless bets made from loneliness and desperation, become the best choices. Sometimes what looks like transaction becomes transformation. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's worth keeping. "Best investment I ever made," Dominic said quietly, arms wrapped around her waist. "Terrible ROI on paper, infinite returns on everything that matters." She leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We were both idiots." "Completely. Want to keep being idiots together?" Evangeline thought about the question about the hotel corridor and the contract and the impossible week that shouldn't have worked. About choosing connection over safety, messy humanity over optimized isolation. About betting everything on something real instead of settling for something profitable. "For the rest of our lives," she said. The city sprawled below them, witness to their beginning and their becoming. Somewhere out there, desperate people were making impossible choices. Somewhere loneliness masqueraded as success while connection hid behind transactions. But here now, 2 former strangers had found everything they'd been missing, and that was worth more than any empire, any calculation, any carefully optimized life could ever deliver.